Now that
Today
we've helped
is...
you customize and save with Liberty Mutual, we can finally do some beach reading.
Are we live? Or?
Janice, I'm here.
Okay, David, 1 second. Hi, everybody.
Okay.
This is Janice Wold-Grenadier, and we are bringing to you our second show of JudicialPedia.com. It's the solution to the judicial corruption, trying to make the judiciary accountable, a place where I give you a voice on what is happening to you and your family, while gathering the information to hold those creating the criminality in the judiciary accountable. I'm going to start today. We have several guests, and our show is going to be on guardianship. But first, I want to talk a little bit about the election. And the election is very personal to me. And it's not a Republican issue or a Democratic issue. It's a deep state issue. 6 years ago today, I was in jail. I had been sentenced to 30 days, over $8,100 in illegally gotten legal fees that lawyers Ben DeMero of DeMero Ginsburg and Michael Weiser of, he's on his own, in the city of Alexandria, along with divorce lawyer Lona Grenadier Heckman. I was held in solitary confinement for 14 days. I got out in 22 days by sneaking out documents. The 14th day was today. Oh, actually it was yesterday. I was let out of solitary confinement at 5 o'clock on Election Day. Senator Mark Warner, who was reelected yesterday, at that time was running against Ed Gillespie. After I got out of solitary and I was talking to one of the sheriffs, they said they shouldn't really worry about Republicans winning because the Democrats always have enough votes in the background. That's what I believe is happening now. And I don't believe this is a Republican or Democratic thing. I know it looks like it's a Democratic thing, but it's the deep state. And what we're going to be talking about today with the guardianships is if we don't start taking back control of our country and we don't take control of our judiciary and demand our constitutional rights, we have nothing in this country. And we're pretty close to that. So I personally think everybody had better keep their fingers crossed that Trump comes through and that Trump fights to view every vote for all of these communities that all of a sudden have another 10,000 votes that they didn't have. We need to have a clean and fair election. If he doesn't win in a clean and fair election, he doesn't win. But if he loses in a corrupt fashion, and which is what it appears to be right now, then we have a real problem. Because if we don't have a president and a clean election, how can we have a clean legislature, judiciary, and executive branch? We won't. We will be being run basically by Hunter Biden and not Joe Biden. So I want everybody to think about it. You can totally disagree with me, and I have absolutely no problem. But this is personal to me. And it should be personal to anybody who has any type of judiciary issue. So anyway, so let me get on with the show today. Again, I want to remind you, in our government, we have 4 parts of government. We have an executive branch, a judiciary, a legislature, and the 4th branch, which has been hijacked from us, which is the grand jury. And that is the solution for us to get out of these issues. We have grand juries that meet in every community at least once a month, if not more often, and some grand juries in the federal courts who meet every day. We have every right to go into any one of those grand juries per our Constitution and per our rights as Americans and ask for a special grand jury to investigate the crimes that are against us. So let me go ahead and talk about what we're going to actually do today, which is the guardianship scam. And we have 3 people visiting with us today, Irene Grivas, David Winstanley, and Mary Bush. There are 3 children of victims of the guardianship scam. They have a common thing where they had siblings who worked against them. But the three of them have worked tirelessly to try to free their parents. And even after their parents were what I call, and this is how I look at it, is once you're put into a guardianship, if you die in that guardianship, after trying to get out of it, you're basically murdered. So we have all three of them. Their stories are from Pennsylvania. There are two judges that are involved. Judge Jay Hoberg, who Irene Grivas and David Winstanley are victims of. John Granger and John Holman, who couldn't be with us, are also victims of them. And then we have Mary Bush, who is fortunate enough to have her mother still alive. But she's been blocked from seeing her, and she'll be able to go into that. And the judge that's involved in that is Catherine Platt. And all these cases are heard in orphans court. And the judge has the ability in orphans court to seal everything, to keep it private, to put gag orders on the family. And so you're not even allowed to talk about it. You're not even allowed to stand up and chat about it. So we're going to start first with David Winstanley. His mother, Betty Winstanley, who I was also involved in the case, and as an ADA advocate. And we searched out several people to help. One was a Melissa Hawkins for hearing. Another was Jessica Stillman. Jessica Stillman is the, actually we didn't search her out. She works with Judge Hoberg. Jennifer Snare and Mark Levenberg. So, David, I'm going to let you tell some of your story, and I'll ask some questions along the way to talk about the fact you were denied the right to a jury trial, due process, your mother's right to freedom to travel, freedom of speech with a biased judge. David?
Right. My name is David Winstanley. I'm 72 years old. In 2014, my mother was taken to court by an angry sibling because he wanted my parents' money, and he had power of attorney. I took that away from him. He wanted all my parents' money. So he filed for guardianship, and he used my parents' attorney to write that. He paid that attorney, Peter Craybill of Lancaster, about somewhere in the range of $35,000, which he illegally borrowed from the trust to pay that legal fee. And there was a court date set on the 17th of July. Members of a Masonic home in Elizabethtown where they had coerced testimonies. They came to court. The doctors didn't come to court. They testified over the phone. Nurses and basically people from the Department of Aging came and testified that my mother and father, both my father, 19 days before had passed away. 19 days, my mother was taken to court. Imagine. Because she had lived with my father. They were married for 72 years. And just as a side note, Judge Hoberg, when I appealed the case, criticized my mother for being depressed and upset about my father's death. He used that as a reason to seal her life in a guardianship controlled by the police, the local police who were brought in to stop any actions I took, and the home also engaged in that as well. So I just, as another aside, I am a flight attendant, and in early 2019, I had Joe Biden on the airplane from Boston to Washington, D.C. He was brought down by the Massachusetts State Police to the plane, and he sat down, and after they left, he sat down, and first no one else was there. I had my mother's story that Diane Diamond wrote about my mom. She wrote 6, I believe. And I very nicely asked Joe Biden to take a look at this, and I explained what was going on. I said my mother's guardian at the time was Patricia Maisano. She lived in Kennett Square. It's, 15 minutes to a half an hour to Joe Biden's house from Kennett Square. They know each other. Her husband helped get the governor reelected. In any case, Joe Biden looked at that. I explained to him how dangerous it is to the older population and how destructive it is with the families. And it's an extortion of their wealth. And their civil rights have been denied, taken away from them. No trial with a hearing with peers. And Joe Biden looks at me, he goes, "I'm not interested." That was what he said. He handed me the paper back.
Your mother also had a hearing issue. She was legally deaf. Is that correct?
She was taken to court. This was contrived. A lot of people were involved in this. And the home suddenly, just about 3 days before the hearing was set, they had taken her hearing aids. They said, "We wanted to clean them and adjust them for you." Well, my mom never got those back. And my mom said, "I don't have my hearing aids." And she was legally deaf, but if you screamed at her, she could hear you.
Now, the home was Masonic
So
Village.
I called up her court-appointed, what's that?
The home was Masonic Village, is that correct?
Yes, Masonic Village in Elizabethtown, Pennsylvania.
Okay.
A very big, supposedly reputable institution. And it's been around for over 100 years. So somebody there had colluded probably with my brother and perhaps the judge that my mother wasn't going to be able to hear in the hearing. So she couldn't defend herself. She wouldn't know what she was being tried for. So I immediately called up to her attorney and asked her to postpone it or wait until we get notice of when she gets her hearing aids back. And she said, "Oh, that's okay. I'll check with the court and see if they can't provide some hearing devices." I said, "She can't. It's illegal. It's against ADA rules that she goes to court and can't hear. That's illegal." And she said, "No, we'll take care of it." So instead of driving over the state line and taking her somewhere else, thinking there might be justice in the court system, I took my mom so she would have somebody on her side to that court. When we got there, we were waiting for the judge to show up, and her court-appointed attorney came up, and her name was, I just forgot it right now. She came up to my mother, leaned over my mother, and said, "Mrs. Winstanley, I'm sorry, but there are no hearing devices available in the courthouse today." And I immediately said to her, "What? Then you'll have to postpone this or set another day. You'll have to do something until my mom can hear. She can't hear." So they end up taking her into the courtroom, and this attorney, in opening remarks, said that my mother didn't have, the courthouse didn't have any hearing devices. And
Now, this
the
was
judge ignored it and continued on.
This was in 2014, was it not?
It was July 17th, 2014.
Okay.
My mother, at the time, was 3 weeks shy, actually, about 10 days shy of being 93 years old. And she lived on her own with my father in their own independent apartment. And suddenly she becomes incapacitated with advanced dementia, according to my brother. So these are the things that you have to watch out for. When you have a relative, a friend, a doctor who's beginning to say that your parents have dementia, be very, very careful to not fall into a trap of agreeing with them. Take them to a neuropsychologist. There are many in Pennsylvania. A lot of the universities have them in their medical schools. There are a couple neuropsychology departments in the Philadelphia area. Harrisburg has, Hershey, Pennsylvania has a big one at Penn State's medical school. So, don't be too willing to go into court. When you get to court, it's up to the judge, and there's no jury. The law says you can have a jury, but they don't provide one. There's no jury of peers. So we had these people from the home coming in saying that both of my parents didn't know where they were, what they were doing. They would actually make my parents undress down to the skin, and then get dressed again in front of them to show them that they got themselves dressed.
So
that's kind of
right. So Masonic Village was involved. They colluded with basically the Guardians, who were I-Corps, Candace Beckett.
Actually, at that time, there was Robert Stump, RES of Havertown, and they colluded with him.
Well, one thing I found interesting was Irene, when I was going over some of the people that were involved with her, she was involved with a firm that was called SaxtonStump.com. And we don't have time to go into it now.
I noticed that.
Excuse me?
I noticed that.
And so I'm wondering if that might be a commonality between the two of you, which we don't have really time to go into today, but there are certain things that, I'm seeing here that are pattern and practice. And, with Judge Hoberg, he is known for putting people into guardianships especially when there's a lot of money, using his friends. And the doctors that he used, now you, as a family, spent quite a bit of money on doctors trying to get your mother out of the guardianship. Your mother was not incapacitated. There are videos of her reading. There are videos of her doing different things. But since we are limited on time, I'm going to fast forward a little bit to when she was fighting to get out of the home. We had brought in from the state of Maryland, or Pennsylvania. And one of the things that's interesting about Pennsylvania, this is an office of the state inspector general, an executive summary that Governor Wolf, when he took office, had created. And in this, it states clearly all the recommendations, all the criminality of what's going on. And it basically, if you try to find it online right now, you can't find it. I happened to get a copy of it, and we will post it on Facebook with this video for you to look at. But here again, it shows how the deep state knows what's going on. They know the pattern and practice. They know the enterprise and the scheme of the guardianship, and they're covering it up. And so why don't we, I'm sorry we have to fast forward, David. We'll have you back definitely to talk more. But I'd like you to tell us the last few weeks of your mother's life.
Well, my mother was very sharp, very intelligent, and she wrote letters to the judge often, requesting, and to the guardians, requesting her release to Maryland. By getting my mother to Maryland and out of the hands of the Pennsylvania courts, I could then give her the freedom that she needed, and it would save thousands of dollars. My mother was, once she was removed from her apartment, they put her in skilled nursing, and that was $10,000 a month for the room. Then she went to a smaller room after she had some she kept falling, and she fell a couple of times pretty badly, and then they finally, through our demands, sisters of mine, we got her to the hospital, and it turned out that she needed a pacemaker, and she was falling because she wasn't getting enough blood to her brain, and she didn't have good balance. So after she went through that, went through the surgery to have a pacemaker put in, she was doing fine. She went to physical therapy, had a good recovery. They put her in a smaller room, which was in personal care for $6,500. That irritated my brother, and he had a meeting with the staff at Masonic Homes, and they moved her into skilled nursing at $14,000 a month. And in court, the judge was constantly talking about spending down my mother's wealth, spending and taking everything she had, artwork, furniture, anything. They tried to take her home. A piece of investment property in the Bahamas disappeared. Another one out in New Mexico disappeared. And so they were spending down somebody's money when they have the money to pay for things at a reasonable rate is Medicaid fraud. And I tried to engage the IRS in that. I tried to call the government about the fraud, and even Jennifer Sneer. Janice was with me on some of those meetings, and nobody would come forward. No one. So you're really on your own. My mom started in June of 2019. She started coughing and not feeling well, and she seemed like she was in pain. And it turned out she developed pneumonia, and I could see that coming. And everybody denied it. The guardian, the state-appointed guardian, who was formerly my mother's attorney.
Well, prior to the pneumonia, they had taken her hearing aids again. This was a pattern in practice to try to kind of...
And the lens out of her glasses.
And they had taken one of the lenses out of her glasses. So she, not having hearing aids, not having her glasses, she had a fall. Getting up from the drive. And she broke her back. She was left in her room, in her bed, and for 1 week, a little over a week, I believe, and with six broken ribs? And
six. And Janice, they took x-rays of her. They brought an x-ray machine into her room, and they knew that she had injured herself badly.
Correct.
And they ignored it.
And
we don't know if that was court, driven, because she became problematic to the judge.
So Masonic Village, who had the responsibility of her, was putting everything off, and I was involved in this as an ADA advocate at the time, was putting everything off onto the guardian, who was Candace Beckett. And Candace Beckett and Masonic Village had taken the stand. They were going to basically let her die in that room in pain. And it was through phone calls to Kingsbury.
And they told us that.
Who was Kingsbury, the CEO, who, we have what we need of that conversation available, that basically she was being murdered in the home. And at that point, he immediately had her rushed to the emergency room, where we learned of the extent of her damages. Now, at this point, I would say they had stolen at least $2 million and bankrupted her, pretty much. And you want to finish there, David? And then we'll move on?
They took and controlled most everything, and here's another very important thing. The guardians can do, they received my dad's insurance policy. It was $251,000 written to the guardian, because the guardian becomes your God, your mother.
I believe the
And they
guardians
control-
even told the two of you, told you, your sister, that your
Yes.
mother now belonged to
From-
her, and
Yeah.
they were calling her mom instead of allowing you to call her mom. I remember.
Yeah,
Davis Beckett-
well, what Patricia made, yeah. She said, from now on, I'm your mother.
So,
That's a pretty cold, frightening statement. I wanted to, excuse me for saying this, but I wanted to reach across her little conference table and choke her to death right on the spot. So we won't go into that further.
Yeah.
But in any case, none of this money is ever accounted for on one day alone. Patricia Maisano, my mother's second guardian, I got the first one thrown out because he didn't do a lot of things properly, but he had failed to notify the IRS that he was now guardian to my mother, and he would be doing a proper tax report. But on one day, Patricia Maisano transferred $361,000 from a Vanguard account into her account in New York City, New York Bank of Mellon in New York City.
right.
And we never knew what happened to that money, $361,000. When I had Stump removed, who was stated as a friend of the judge when he appointed him, $491,000 was missing from the transfer from one guardian to another. The judge so far has attributed that to just a documentation mistake.
Well, and not only that, I mean,
so-
you've been able to track the friendships amongst the judges and the doctors that he used to find your mother incapacitated. The state
Yeah.
of Pennsylvania, who we had several meetings with, which included Department of Justice, investigators, doctors, Department of Aging, Department of Health, and we need to get on to the other stories. Everybody had pretty much the same story. They seem like they care. They talk to you. I think Jennifer Sneer has been the most biggest disappointment to me, and Melissa Hawkins, because she is deaf. She knows exactly what it feels like, and yet she ignored the situation, and they ignore it to keep their jobs. And I think it's just a disgrace. And these two are also aware of Mary Bush's situation. And, I'd like to, David, give you just a few more minutes to wrap it up so that we can talk to Irene and Mary.
Okay, I'll do it pretty quickly. My mother went downhill very fast with a pneumonia, and she developed viral pneumonia because she couldn't expel and breathe deeply in her lungs, so she developed an infection. We finally had to threaten the guardian with arrest, and she got scared enough that she did call an ambulance. They took my mom to the hospital at Hershey Medical Center, where they did extensive tests on my mother. And my mother was conscious. We have some documentation where they asked them.
She even got up and walked. They had told her she would be in a wheelchair, and she instead chose to do a brace and was able to even spend a day walking after all this.
Yeah, that was afterwards. She did live for about 5 days after that, and then she had a visitor, my brother, and we don't know what he said to her, but she just gave up after that. I wanted to prove that this judge and the guardians were all wrong, including my brother, and that my mother didn't have Alzheimer's or dementia, so I ordered an autopsy of her brain. That autopsy was of another person's body. We have the records from the hospital and my mother's records and photographs of my mom as well. even down to her fingernails. And the body was swapped at some time along the way. There was a delay in getting the autopsy done, and the whole thing was falsified. And the conclusion was the same as the judge's doctor, that my mother had advanced Alzheimer's.
Which
So that's how
wasn't
serious
her
a
brain,
crime.
so. I mean, the
It wasn't her brain. It wasn't her body that the hospital, Allegheny General Hospital, autopsied.
Right, and it was
I've
Dr.
been able to get no one to investigate this, and no one to take the case as an attorney for this tragedy. I mean, it's just, and how many times has this been done
And
to people?
you used one of the top people. You used Dr. Weck, who had done, I think it was Epstein's autopsy, or was it
He was called, Bobby Kennedy's.
He'd done Bobby Kennedy's
death.
autopsy, so it wasn't like you just
Yeah.
chose somebody. You did a lot of research and got somebody who you felt would be credible.
And visible,
Yeah.
highly
David,
visible.
we're very
And-
sorry you've had to go through this, and like I said, we'll have you on again, and you may want to make some comments, but I'd like to move on. So this is Judge Hoberg. Judge Hoberg is involved with John Granger and Irene Graves and John Holman, and we have Irene Graves now. Irene, would you like to give us a little story? And then I'm coming right to you, Mary Bush. Don't worry, okay? Because we have a lot to talk about your mom, too, and she's still alive, and we need to fight to see if we can't get you more access to her.
Get her free.
Yes. So, Irene, you want to jump in now here about your friend Judge Hoberg?
Oh, yes. My mother was declared incapacitated back in 1999, even without any doctor stating that she was incompetent. It was just a simple letter. There was really no due process, but there was a language barrier. My mother is an immigrant of Greece, so she didn't really speak English very well, but she did contest it. Within less than an hour, she was declared incapacitated, and it's been an uphill battle since.
What year was that, Irene?
That was in 1999.
1999, okay. So you've been fighting this since 1999.
I would
Because I
say
know
I
you're
was
still in the
well,
midst
that's
of
when
this.
it started, and that's when she was declared incapacitated. And when I saw how much money was being wasted and fraudulently, because my mother had over a $1.2 million estate that compiled real estate, investments, mutual funds, CDs, so forth. But when I quickly saw, like within a year, what was going on, and it started with the rental properties. And the bank, in my mother's case, was appointed guardian of my mother's estate. I did have power of attorney prior to that, which had been revoked, easily revoked. It's been an uphill battle trying to get any answers. The bank, once they became guardian of her estate, was very not forthcoming, despite my numerous demands and requests. And my only recourse was basically to file objections through Orphans Court, and it was laughable because no matter how I tried to point out a lot of the waste and the fraud that was going on, it was basically denied. I've had numerous attorneys. What am I up to now? I raised my first objections in 2003, and again in 2004, again in 2008, and again in 2014, or actually 2015, when my mother passed. I feel she was murdered because they denied her medication, they denied information. Despite her having all this kind of money, she lived like she was a very poor person, which is totally unacceptable. But I had no power to really stop it or do anything about it. And even after her passing, whatever little remained, they still withheld. It wasn't until just the beginning of the year where they, through my ninth attorney, actually my 10th attorney, was able to get some of the money that was being in the estate out, because I had raised objections to the bank's accounting, having to do with the rental properties with the investment monies that basically disappeared and they couldn't account for. And the fight is still, it's been almost 6 years. December 4th will be 6 years after my mother's passing, and I'm still fighting them.
It takes a real toll on you as well.
It is. It's very true.
Go ahead.
Oh, I'm sorry. Go ahead.
No, I was going to say, and usually friends that you've had and things like that, when you try to talk to them about them, or even a spouse or your children, instead of people giving you the grace that you deserve for sticking up for yourself, but more so sticking up for your mother, just like every child tries to. David did it with his mother. Mary Bush has been amazing. People instead are harmful to you. They're not nice to you. They, seem to, I think you've probably experienced, like everybody, you feel very alone. And we have to change this attitude that people have, because we have to have people understand how broken we become inside and how hurt. And I'm right there with you. Maybe it wasn't a guardianship, but, there's so many other issues out there that the courts have been able to take from us through, divorce and stuff like that. I applaud you. And I just wanted to go over some of the names of the people and see if you could tell me a little bit about what what first comes to your mind about their involvement in this. One would be Aaron Groff. I believe he's CEO of EPNB. Is that correct?
It's Efron National Bank, ENB, yes.
Okay. So what was their participation in this scheme?
Well, I had gone to him prior to me filing objections to show him some of the overcharges and double billing and fraudulent invoices that were clearly obvious to me. And they didn't have to hire anyone. I went through many, many hours of going through the paperwork and pointing them out to him. And he said he'll have a second set of eyes look at that. But then nothing came out of it.
So basically the bank was able to steal from you as well, or from your mother.
Well, I think it's a collusion because it wasn't the bank, as far as the rental properties, it wasn't the bank directly involved. It was through a third party, which is Trinity Management. But under
and
their
that was
umbrella,
Tim Patches, right?
Yes, which is Tim Patches under Trinity Management. Trinity Management had no duty to me, to answer to me. I had no power, basically. Their client was the bank, which is who I went to, the bank, to explain and show them how year after year, when these properties should have been profitable every single year, should have been grossing easily between 50 and 60,000. Instead, it was at a negative cash flow. Not only was there no income, no net profit income, but it was costing the estate between $1,000 and $7,000-8,000 every single year. I said, this is crazy. For an estate, for the real estate that was worth almost $500,000, why they will continue holding on to real estate if it's no longer profitable? And the reason it was not profitable is because they were colluding. Somehow they were getting kickbacks, or they were just didn't care. They wanted to do as little as possible and collect the fees. meaning the bank, Effort National Bank.
So that's usually done. We have a bank in the city of Alexandria. It's called Birkenherber Bank, and he uses all of his friends, you know, and there's always kickbacks. So most likely Trinity Management somehow, and a kickback can be a lot of different things. It can be dinner. It can be a trip with your wife somewhere that you don't pay for. There's a lot of ways of covering up how you're getting money back to the person. One of the things that's being exposed right now by judges, by Janet Phelan, she's got a video out, is that judges have been getting loans on their properties. They've been getting mortgages, and somehow the mortgages get paid off in 2 years. So they take $500,000, 2 years it's paid off, and they get another $500,000. And so we're coming out, we're starting, people are waking up, and they're starting to see the issue. Now, there were a couple other people you had mentioned to me. One is a Scott Mitchell, and another is, I don't know if the initials are Sam, if he's with SaxtonStump.com.
Yes, that's correct.
Now, it was Saxton Stump. Were they lawyers, or were they guardians? Were they lawyers? What was their job?
Saxton and Stump is who Scott Mitchell is working for now. At the time, he was with McNeese and Wallace, but shortly after he had withdrew from the case, he moved on to Saxton and Stump.
Okay, and then you had Jeff Goss.
Yes, that is correct. He's I guess a real estate attorney, and he does many estates, yet he would have, there would be conferences with a judge. I was not even notified. I was not informed that there was any kind of a conference, upcoming conference, and things were being done behind my back. That was obviously not in my mother's best interest or myself. He didn't even bother to get any of the annual accountings that showed the discrepancies from year after year, how the ending balance should follow to the following year. There were just numbers all over the place. And now with my current attorney, we're seeing all that. And eventually, when I was demanding for these documents, which they had refused to me, despite my motion to compel, which on my own I have not been able to acquire, through my current attorney, he was able to get the complete annual accountings, and he strongly recommended getting a forensic expert, which I did. And through that, we're seeing all the inconsistencies and the cover-ups that have been going on all these years.
And so basically, your mother was well taken care of. She was financially in a situation that she could take care of herself. She was getting along fine. And all of a sudden, Judge Hoberg gets hold of her. And just like with Granger, Holmes, David, and his family, he sees how much money is there. The scheme is recreated with the real estate going to a bank that he has a tie to, or somebody within this scheme has a tie to. They use the bank's Trinity Management Associates, the attorneys to answer your questions about the issues that you'd brought up. You had to pay for those attorneys, correct?
Of course. I mean,
and then your mother had to pay for the attorneys out of her estate for the bank, Trinity Management, and everybody else.
Correct.
So when you went to court, you had an attorney that you paid for. The estate didn't pay for. And then how many attorneys would you have on the opposing side that your mother was paying for that was ignoring the mistakes in the documents?
Oh, at least 3, 4.
So that was $1,000, maybe more an hour, that your mother was paying for attorneys that were stealing from her.
Correct.
Okay. Well, I'm really sorry you've had to go through this. And I just, I know it's so difficult, and I just really appreciate you coming on and talking about it. Is there anything else you would like everybody to know?
Yes, even like this attorney Scott Mitchell, what was really intriguing was I was trying to figure why, if I was a client, why he was not really doing what I was paying him to do and why he was making all these mistakes. And as it turned out, he was actually, his mother happened to be paralegal on the opposing side. That kind of made it all fit together, which explained why, when I had hired him, why he signed the verification page that's usually signed by the client, which is me. He just filed whatever he wanted to file that basically sabotaged my case to unfavorable denial.
And once again, we have an unbelievable story that even you're living it, and I bet at times you have to pinch yourself and say, is this really happening to me?
Exactly.
Yeah.
It's it leaves you broken. It kind of robs your joy and happiness, because this is something that you live with not only 1 year.
Well,
It lingers on years after it has happened.
Yeah, no, I am so sorry you've had to be through it. I'd like to, I mean, please stay on it, but I'd like to get to Mary Bush. Mary, thank you for being so patient. Your mother is still alive.
If you call it that. Currently locked up in Green Meadows in Malvern. And it's not because of COVID, it's because of this guardianship. She is not getting any visitation. She gets a once a month half-hour Zoom where I can view her, but they don't show her how to participate. They don't engage with her whatsoever. They're keeping her in bed 24/7 where her joints are starting to lock up. She's being neglected of care. And in the regulatory law of nursing homes, the diminishment of someone is supposed to be monitored and it's supposed to be stopped. And through passing my mother from Pocopson Home to Park Lane at Bellingham and now Green Meadows in Malvern, the diminishment has been documented through the PA Department of Health, and they're doing nothing. I reported to Denise Getchen of APS. She's the head of all APS in Pennsylvania. She does nothing. She now, all my calls are, put towards her. She becomes the intake person. And as the intake person, as a public servant, she takes the phone and she hangs up on me. So the Department of Aging has a duty of care that they are supposed to be taking these complaints from people, no matter who they come from. It's an elder abuse issue. And Denise Getchen hangs up on me. I recently just wrote a letter to Secretary Torres for her, asking for her resignation, because the Department of Aging has a responsibility to all elders, not just elders that are in guardianship. But what I've noticed is that the elders that are in guardianship are the ones that are totally ignored. Any complaint done on their behalf, anything done, you can see the collusion going on with these the parasitically attached guardians. Carol J. Hershey has a contract with the local Chester County Department of Aging, which is a conflict that when you ask that they investigate her, they won't do it. And in fact, they breached their duty in where they're supposed to keep my complaint confidential. They told Carol J. Hershey that I asked for them to be investigated. And her employee, Gail Birkenstock, came to me and said, we're going to find a way to get rid of you because you're reporting us to the Department of Aging. So she would have known that unless somebody like Heidi Carlson, Cindy Willison, or Doug Bernard at the Department of Aging in Chester County had told them. And the fact that they're in a monopoly with these courts is another fact that everybody's, not recognizing. A monopoly is when they get a captive client base. They're getting a captive client base from the courts. And in the consumer laws, you have a right to get away from a provider who's not providing the service. There's no way to get away from these people. The only way I got my mom away from Carol J. Hershey was pretty much exposing her. I would watch what she's doing online. I would watch what she's doing. She did false pretense billing. False pretense billing is when they're just adding on things and like $500 to see Mary.
Now, can we stop for a minute? Because I want to take these people and kind of dissect it here. Your judge is Kathleen Platt.
Right. Catherine,
she is in the orphans court, and which is basically a secret court. It doesn't allow any type of transparency.
it's not only that, it's an unconstitutional court because the courts are taking the liberties away from people without the due process that occurs. They're not following procedures. They're not following even jurisdiction rules. Under the Chester County jurisdiction rules, the judge has to have the trust in their possession, the original trust instrument, to have jurisdiction over the trust.
We're jumping a little bit ahead because at what point was your mother deemed incapacitated? What year?
2011, but it was done without anyone seeing her except the parasitically attached court-appointed guy, Dr. Mapes.
And so at that point in time, she was active. The two of you were doing a lot of things. You were having a good time together. And
she was totally competent.
And she was financially financially taken care of, had been left financially in a good place by your father. Is that correct?
Yes, she had close to $3 million in assets when my father became ill. She actually ended up, my brothers went in and took some money, so she sued them in 2007. The parasitically attached lawyer, Alexander Jakowski, knowing that, all this stuff prior, waited to 2009 and sued both me and Mom under the guardianship statute, where he really had no jurisdiction over me. But I was drug in, and then the thing went on with lawyers just entering. I lost track of the number of lawyers. I had to hire a lawyer. Mom hired the lawyer that the constable called for her. That was Rigger, Rizzo, and Darnell. The constable called them on the phone, and she hired them. I didn't know that till after the fact. I hired James Ruggiero. He threw me under the bus. He took about close to $300,000 from me and threw me under the bus. And I watched down the hallway a lot of handshakes, patting to each other. They're all in on this. They know that these courts are not competent courts to be taking away property that's covered under the Constitution. They're taking away our civil rights and our liberties. And these are not the courts to be into. And that's why I'm trying to get getting into the law, because even due process of law has discovery. And what Judge Platt has done since 2011, since saying that my mom lacked capacity, she actually gave an unqualified diagnosis of Alzheimer's disease. So there's no diagnosis of Alzheimer's disease except for what Judge Platt diagnosed the person who she clairvoyantly saw, because my mom never had a day in court. So we have these incompetent judges, judges that are violating law, lawyers that are joining in that, and it's just a mess. And anybody who thinks that they're going to hire a lawyer in these courts and get anywhere, it's impossible. These courts are set up to rob estates, period. It doesn't matter what your brother did, your sister did. They're going to use the family dynamics in these courts to justify, to make a false pretense record against one member of the family so they can access that money. That's the bottom line with what guardianships are being used for. We need more accountability, oversight, and criminal penalties to the people that are abusing these venues like the orphans court. And we need to get them out of the orphans court. I agree with you with grand juries. We have to get the grand juries back. I mean, we should be able to take cases like this where a single lawyer, in my opinion, Alexander Jakowski is the one who started all this, knowing the amount of money my mom had in 2007. He goes into the orphan court, gets her backdated, and this is something else Judge Platt did, backdated her to 2006 to undo, I think my mom had 13 advance directives in place to cover herself because she knew that the predation started immediately after my father passed.
So your mother had done all the right things. She had already
Yes.
put into place, if something were to happen to her, who would take care of her, how
Yes.
her estate, her will was in place, a trust was in place, and
the other thing that people don't talk about is there's alternates. My mom had 3 alternates. She had, first as a trustee, she was the first trustee. I was the secondary. And then she had her brother and a friend, and she did that in her medical power of attorney, in her other, durable power of attorneys. There were alternates. None of those alternates were ever, discussed in court. They focused on me. They tried to say I overly mastered her, which is a common thing. They use common language where, oh, you overly mastered, you did this, but there's no substance to it. They don't say how you overly mastered or how you did this or that. They just make the false narrative. And there's no fighting it because whatever goes on in the court, when you take it to the Superior Court and try to do an appeal, they're just going to back up what the judge did.
now I will say this one thing. When David took to the appeals court, even one of the appeals judge said, do we no longer live in America? Shouldn't she be living in Maryland if that's where she wants to live? Seems totally capacitated to me. But Judge Hoberg walked in the door and said, no, not going to let you go.
Right. And they call that discretionary powers, which in these cases should go away. The judges should not have discretionary powers of liberties and your guaranteed rights under the Constitution. There's no such thing.
So you were visiting your mother on a regular basis. You were still trying to have a life with her while fighting with this for her and trying to help her. And then you went to visit her one day, and she had been taken advantage of by your brother. The system knows it. The judge knows it. And they've covered it up along with the nursing home. And instead, they then targeted you.
Correct.
As a person of interest, that instead of the person who had harmed your mother.
Correct. Because if you're the legitimate power of attorney or if you're the legitimate protector of the person, they're going to block you, stop you, defame you, so they can continue to access the funds. The whole goal in this is to access the funds. And if you notice in most guardianship cases, as soon as they are done with the funds, they're done with the person, and the person all of a sudden happens to die.
Well, either that or once they're done with the funds, they put them into Medicaid, and it becomes a scam to basically steal from the taxpayers, which is what they've done to your mother at this point.
There's a deliberate liquidation of the assets to hurry the person towards that Medicaid. Correct.
And I'd like to talk a little bit about Chatowski. And I don't want to step on any toes, or if you are uncomfortable talking about him, but I had intervened into a case you have against him.
Correct.
And he has violated his code of ethics in several occasions that I've seen. But yet the bar doesn't do anything to help.
Correct.
And, so Pennsylvania Bar, I know we had lawyers actually file complaints for David against Candace Beckett. They accepted the complaint, and Candace Beckett even, I don't know if you could say stole them, but because she was the guardian of person, but took the medical records from Masonic Village and refuses to give them to the family or the lawyers. And I know you're having similar issues.
Well, the conduct board is other lawyers. Why can other lawyers, be guarding the hen house, so to say, of other lawyers? What we need to do is we need to get lay people on those boards. And even like when I was turning in, and I did turn in Alex Jakowski, the lawyer that was taking the intake, I had to turn him in for some unethical things that he was doing.
Well, and this is the trickle down effect, is what I call it. You have a Supreme Court of the state, you have a governor involved, because we know the governor knows about it. He requested the Inspector General do a report. He's got a almost 20-page report that's very detailed.
He also assigned a Dan German, who we've been, feeding him information, and we haven't heard a thing back. That all this COVID stuff took over, and all the election stuff took over, and that's
now, Governor Wolf had COVID patients going to nursing homes. Is that correct, or am I wrong with that?
That's my understanding, and
so he was following in the footsteps of Cuomo in New York City.
Yeah, and that's what I understand to be the most the number of deaths came from nursing homes.
Correct. So your mother's alive. I have visited her twice. You can tell when you mention your name, she lights up. You have pretty much been barred, or you have to pay to see your mother. You have been beat up by the police in
Correct.
them trying to block you. You're not a very big girl. You're not someone that you would be afraid of. So we have the collusion of also the police, as we did with David, in trying to create a smoke and mirrors of you being an unsafe person, of having issues, which are all untrue.
Right.
Is that correct?
The case against James Reginger and Ted Lewis is in the federal court system now. So, they wouldn't let me leave the property at Park Lane. I agreed to leave. I was on my way out, and they blocked my way to create the false pretense record against me.
And so since then now you have to pay to see your mother. Is that correct?
I was paying to see. I didn't see my mom for 2 years solid. And then Judge Platt made a very controversial visitation order where I could go to the county facility. My mom had to pay to see me, I had to pay to see her, and it was for 1 hour once a month with a deputy with a gun and a supervisor from Adult Protective Services watching me. And then all these complaints that I'm filing and documenting and giving to APS, there's no follow-up. There's nothing from them. If they were truly investigating anything, they would come back to you and say, well, what about this? What about that? They don't. They're not doing their job. They're not in compliance with the law. They are not qualified to investigate these cases.
So with your mother still alive, what is something the people who listen to this tape or you would like to see them do to try to make a change in the situation for you? That is there people that should be called? Is there letters that could be written? Do you have a change.org or anything like that?
Oh, I don't have anything set up, but I have a page, the Free Mary Bush's Mom. It's a Facebook page. And I try to just post what's going on in guardianships and in nursing home situations. We need to change the laws, and that's what I've been working with. I'm hoping that Eric Rowe here gets elected, and Senator Mastriano and Senator Killian here, because I've been in touch with their offices. I'm showing them, gradually, and I wish other people would do it too, the loopholes that these parasitically attached people who are in this guardianship, how they're doing what they're doing. There's a way to end it, and it's to cover those loopholes in the laws.
Well, That's one way of doing it, but another way of doing it is imposing and enforcing the laws we have on the books, enforcing our Constitution, and enforcing our four freedoms. You know, the United States didn't sign on to the human rights and going to international court, but we were given four freedoms in 1940, and it was freedom of speech, freedom of worship, freedom from want, and freedom from fear. And that's already in our Constitution, and it's in your state constitution. Pennsylvania has a great state constitution, but fear is what all of us live in every day.
Oh, and they make
Fear
sure
of what
that,
these people are doing.
They make sure that you live in that fear, and just because, like, I keep fighting this, I don't go away after I've gone to 2 lawyers personally. My mom no longer has a lawyer. Intimidation.
What happened to Tchaikovsky? Whose lawyer is Tchaikovsky then?
He's the lawyer for my brother Joseph and Michael, who started this way back in when my father he had gotten sick with a stroke. But I've gone pro se pretty much since 2014, learning the laws, learning the loops, and I'm actually the one who's doing most of the filings and things like that. But just recently, in the beginning of this year, Judge Platt threatened me from the bench. She threatened me because I am stopping the sale of the property that they're trying to steal. And that threat still is lingering over my head.
Well, I'm sorry to hear that. We're going to go ahead and wrap this up. I really appreciate David, you, Irene, Mary. Do you have a last statement either of you would like to make?
Well, when it comes to guardianship, there is no fighting it in these courts. We have to engage our politicians to make things in the law a little bit different. We got to close the loopholes. Anybody who's in guardianship knows what those loopholes are. With nursing homes, there's a thing that people don't know about is the fact that you can start a family council. And the ombudsman under the Older Americans Act is supposed to help you with that family council. But again, here we go. The ombudsman is attached to the Pennsylvania Department of Aging, and they're doing nothing.
And Irene, would you like to have a last word?
I agree, basically. We just need to close all the loopholes and stop this abuse, because that's basically what guardianship is. It's abuse and theft of people's money and life to make changes so this travesty doesn't continue happening to other family members and elderly victims of this kind of scam, I call it.
So actually, I don't know if you're aware of this or not. On Judicialpedia, we have the Killers of Flower Moon. And it was a guardianship that started in 1920, actually February 13th, 1920. And that is when the FBI was created. In order to stop it, it was the Osage Indian Nation in Oklahoma. And they were victims of the racism and the wealthiest people per capita. They were very wealthy, because they had owned the land originally. They were Indians. The white man, I guess you would say, came in, the lawyers and stuff, basically took over their property, took over the management of it, robbed it of all its assets, and they're still doing it. So the FBI knows what's going on. They know the scheme, and they're turning the other way. And they were created out of this. The FBI was actually created in order to protect this Native American tribe. And yet, they're still under the thumb of a guardian. So, I don't know. I personally think guardianship is no different than divorce, no different than foreclosure, no different than any other civil suit that goes in front of these judges who looks at not the people that are involved, but how much money is involved and how much they can get for themselves and how much they can get for their friends and how to make them more wealthy. And, I'm going to go back now to where we are in this election. And, The perfect example and why I'm doing Judicialpedia was those 22 days I spent in jail and the 14 days in solitary confinement so that Senator Mark Warner could get reelected. And we have such a problem with the deep state, and it's these lawyers that are a part of this. It's these judges that are a part of it. And until we can somehow get the grand jury, which was hijacked in 1964 from us by the judiciary, because they didn't want us going in there and talking about the public corruption and everything. And in Virginia, they took a step further. The FBI in 2014 did a directive that all public corruption would go to, would only be investigated by the FBI in D.C., which, who was that? Oh, it was McCabe, who got $750,000 approximately from Terry McAuliffe. It was James Comey. So you see, McCabe is a Democrat, Comey was a Republican. So this is not a Republican-Democrat thing. These are crimes against our citizens. You can look at General Flynn. You can look at a lot of other people. And we have these cases up on judicialpedia.com. And so I would like everybody in the audience to go there. And if they have a case, the only way we're going to make a difference is by all working together. And if you go into the courtroom and you can show 4 or 5 other cases that this judge has done it to, the judge is going to recuse himself. He doesn't want this. And the more vocal we are, the more we're out talking about it. They don't want to walk into a party and somebody say, oh, Judge Platt, Janice Wolk-Grenadier and Mary Bush and a few other people were talking about you and about the amount of money you've stolen from her mother in the millions and blocking her own daughter from seeing her.
And all done without due process of law.
Right. And, Pennsylvania is a unique state. And I always say, one person can make a difference. Remember, it was Cash for Kids. It was one mother who the judge had a financial standing in the jail. Her son came out of jail, committed suicide. And she made sure that judge went to jail because he had a financial standing in there. And that's what we all have to remember. And we all have to know we can make a difference, especially all of us together.
Yep.
So, we'll wrap that up. I really want to thank you guys for coming on and keep up the good work. If there's anything we can do, let us know. And please add to your stories as they're happening on Judicialpedia. So if you know anybody with the guardianships, let's get them up there. Let's make it. Thank you.
Thank you.